Hello YouTube, and welcome to a new episode of Lifter Profile. Today we're going to analyze one of the most ridiculous specimens of man I've ever seen in my long years on YouTube fitness, namely Tom Haviland. Now Tom is enhanced, and I usually don't cover PD users on this channel because I don't believe that there's much to learn from them for natural lifters. But I'm going to make an exception for Tom because his training methods might be even more impressive than his physique, and that is saying a lot. So for those of you who don't know who the guy is, Tom Haviland is 6 feet 8 and weighs 400 pounds. He fluctuates between 350 and 400. He has a 1,000 pound frame carry, a 1,000 pound block pull 2 inches off the floor, so we're not talking about the bar above the knee, okay? It's like a deadlift, it's very close to a deadlift. He has a 700 pound Zercher squat and a 660 pound bench press. All of this while staying at around 10% body fat with a fucking six pack. This is not a guy who is fluffy, he's not strongman build. This is a guy who looks like an actual bodybuilder who can lift all the weight in the gym. And he also has veins everywhere. You'll see, I'll put some videos of him on the screen. He looks like he's out of Grappler Baki. If you read Baki, you know of Jack Anma, of course. This guy is literally Jack Anma in real life. He's a giant muscle dude with freak level strength. And on top of that, he also has crazy athleticism. You would think that someone who weighs that much would be immobile or a bit slow. Think again, the guy is a train, he's an actual horse. That's the level of freak that we're talking about here. And oftentimes, you'll hear PD users claim that drugs don't do that much and actually juice is just a small portion of having a good physique, blah, blah, blah. A lot of the time, it's just people coping because they don't want to have to admit that a lot of their success and gains come from the drugs. But this is one actual case where I'll admit that, yeah, no amount of drugs will turn you into Tom Haviland. No amount of juice is going to make you perform at that level. It's absolutely impossible. It takes crazy genetics, but it also takes insane discipline and an excellent training program. And that's exactly why I wanted us to study Tom today, because as we'll see, even as naturals, there is a lot we can learn from the guy. So as always with this series, the episode is divided in 3 parts. First, we'll review Tom's training, then we'll cover his diet and his lifting philosophy, and finally, I'll venture a critique of his physique despite him being twice my size. And you'll see that when I say twice my size, I'm not exaggerating at all. So let's get started with the training of the beast. When it comes to methods, Tom uses a mix of strongman and powerlifting movements, and from what I've heard, he doesn't compete. So it's not because he has a need for these lifts to get super high, because he needs to get good at them to win a prize. It's literally because he finds them enjoyable and he just likes doing them, which is insane because the guy lifts world record level weights and he just does them for fun, entirely for himself. And that already is super respectable. I really like that. I like the fact that he's not limited or shackled by the conventions of a sport, and he's not doing that for fame. It's simply that he wants to be the biggest and strongest person he can possibly be. And he does all of that with makeshift equipment. He goes to a gym sometimes, but most of his training is done on his massive property that he owns in the outback of Australia. And again, I'll show you videos. It's really picturesque. It's really pretty. Then in the middle of all of this natural beauty, you have this monstrous guy who is lifting all sorts of weights, which again is like anime level shit. Because in every single anime, in Baki for example, you always have that arc where the hero is going to go into the forest and train with whatever he has available and he turns into a beast. In Baki, there's literally the Yasha arc, the Yasha ape arc, where Baki goes into the mountains to fight a giant monkey, and he meets a man who lives there called Endo, who is himself a giant who trains with makeshift equipment. That's Tom. That's literally Tom. We found him. He's in Australia. And seriously, how fitting is it that this man who looks like a monster would also happen to be on the one continent on Earth that contains every single animal that has made it its life mission to kill humans? I mean, shit, even a jellyfish can kill you in Australia. And these are not the biggest threats out there. There's even like saltwater crocodiles that can weigh upwards of 1,000 pounds and be 20 feet long. They are literal dinosaurs and monsters. And some people would say that the most dangerous animal in Australia is the saltwater crocodile, but I would beg to disagree. I think that Tom is actually a very strong contender for most dangerous animal. Because I think that if you come across a Tom Haviland on an empty stomach, especially if he's on a bulk, there's a strong chance you're not going to make it home. The guy is going to turn you into a snack. And that might explain all of the disappearances of hikers in the outback. Some people blame the Yowie, which is a version of Bigfoot that exists in Australia. I think that the answer is much more simple and less fantastical than that. It's just Tom. It's people who crossed his property when he was training and he needed a quick protein snack, so he snatched them up and he ate them. Because the Yowie is supposed to be like a big airy ape. Yeah, that's just Tom when he's not shaved. Like, don't look further than that. We have found your culprit. But jokes aside, let's get back to the training because Tom trains for size sometimes, but that's not his main thing. The guy is that much of a monster while not focusing on being a monster. And the type of method he runs is called tactical hypertrophy, which in reality is just a more badass way to say that he trains for function, but he also implements bodybuilding into the mix. And if you watch my channel, you know that I have a deeply rooted hatred for functional training. But in this case, I'll give it a pass. One, because Tom scares me, and two, because the way he's doing it actually makes a ton of sense. So this is what I want to explain right now. So the way he articulates his training is as follows. He starts the day, usually in the morning, with a ton of super specific stuff for his sport. So he might start, for example, with a ton of carries, Zercher carries, strongman carries, that are going to, granted, also grow your traps and upper back to a great extent, but for the rest of the body, it might not be that good. But after that, to get a more complete stimulus, he'll get back to the gym in the afternoon, and this is when he'll train for hypertrophy. So he'll do, for example, a classic bro chest day, where he'll start with dumbbell bench press, with the most disgusting tempo I've ever seen in my life, super crisp, 6 to 10, and then he might move on to some cable flies for the chest, 10 to 15 again with very slow tempo, very controlled, and you can sense that the guy is intent. This is how you train for bodybuilding. You don't just move weights around. It's not about how much shit you can move. It's how much you can actually use the muscle and recruit the fibers to actually move that weight and use that weight for hypertrophy. So that's already a testimony to his adaptability as an athlete. He's able to go ape shit when needed, but he's also able to tune himself in and use less weight when it comes to just building muscles. And the same applies to legs. So for legs, he might start the day with a dynamic motion, so a jump. At 400 pounds, I don't know if you realize how much that means. The fact that his knees don't explode under his weight every time he lands is incredible. But after that, he'll move to some heavy squat work to grow these legs. And he'll do something like a 500-pound at-full squat for sets of 6 to 10. No big deal, right? We can all do that. And then he'll wrap up with leg curls, which is typically the type of day that I would prescribe for someone who wants to grow their legs. Start with a heavy quad emphasis movement, then do something for your posterior chain, and you're pretty much good. You can go home. And the same applies for back and biceps. So for his back, he'll start with a machine row, then he'll move on to weighted neutral grip chin-ups, which again are done at 400 pounds. When you and I, we do chin-ups or pull-ups or whatever, our ligaments and tendons only have to handle our body weights of from 160 to 220 pounds. This is a 400-pound human hanging from a bar who then adds additional weight to his body weight because it's not challenging enough. Most strongmen, most heavyweight athletes cannot do a single pull-up. Even a set of 10 is out of this wood. This guy does them weighted. It is bananas. But if you disregard this crazy strength and you just look at the structure of the day, that's classic stuff. Horizontal pull plus vertical pull is all you need for a back day. So this is super standard. And then when he trains arms, likewise, he'll just pick an isolation movement like an easy bar spider curl for the biceps, and then he'll move on to dips and he'll do some triceps dips. Do you realize how crazy it is for someone that weight to do dips that easily? The average male who weighs 150 struggles with dips. This is someone who is more than twice this body weight and who can just bang them out like they are absolutely nothing. You know, in the past I made a video called Don't Turn Your Back on Calisthenics, because I firmly believe that even as a bodybuilder, if your body weight strength and your ability to move your body through space suffers, it's most likely because your body composition is suffering, you're putting on too much fat. The same applies for him. The reason why he's able to be so agile on body weight movements is because most of his mass is lean mass. He's not carrying that much fat at all. But that's pretty much that for his bodybuilding training. Which begs the question, why did I even make this video in the first place? I mean, there's nothing to learn there. Well, you understand that there must be more to the guy, or else I wouldn't actually bother talking about him. Because what I did not share with you is the fact that everything I just outlined only makes up 1/4 of his training. That's only a very small portion of it. The rest of the time, he's either training for strength, or he's doing conditioning, or he's doing some level of crazy strongman lift, always with a shit ton of weight. And this is what we're going to talk about next, the rest of the program, because it's the rest of the program that makes him an actual monster. So a typical week of training for Tom looks like this. On day 1, he will do squats in the morning, then accessories in the afternoon. So that might be sled pulls, lunges, or CC squats. Day 2, he'll do conditioning in the morning with some agility drills. Then in the afternoon, he does some upper back, neck, and biceps work, so more hypertrophy focused. On day 3, he'll do seated overhead press, sternum pull-ups in the morning, then chest and deltoid accessory work in the evening with some dumbbell bench, some lat pull-downs, and some GM press. On day 4, he rests. On day 5, he does box jumps, then farmer walks, then bag over bar. So a ton of very dynamic strongman events. Then he'll do deadlifts in the afternoon. On day 6, he rests. On day 7, explosive upper body strength in the morning with some medicine ball throws and some plyo push-ups. And then in the afternoon, he does heavy push work with bench and overhead press. So the way he structured his split and training is twice a day, every day, save for 2 rest days a week. That is something that not everyone is able to handle or even to justify. I couldn't justify training like this. I need to train once a day. I don't have more time outside of that. But if you are dedicated to only your practice and you are an athlete, this is something that, from what I understand, is actually optimal because it makes actually planning and scheduling your recovery much more precise and much more effective. Because it allows you to split your sessions between certain qualities. And with Tom's training, we see 4 distinct qualities or modalities. The first one is dynamic strength work, where he's explosive. The second is static strength work, where he is not actually moving, the only thing moving is the weight. Then there is hypertrophy work, where, as I detailed, he trains with higher reps. And then he also does a ton of conditioning. And the reason why the conditioning is just as important as the rest is because Tom is a tactical athlete. So he can never let his ability to move around suffer. He cannot let himself get so strong or so big that he's not fast anymore. He needs to balance all of these qualities equally. And you see that this is reflected directly in the way he programs. So on day 1 and day 3, he will hit some static strength work early in the day when he's still fresh, and then he'll come back in the afternoon and he'll hit the same muscles, but this time for hypertrophy. So on day 1, it's going to be heavy squats in the morning, but this is not enough volume for the legs, so he'll get some accessory for the legs later. Same on day 3, where he'll get the heavy overhead press done in the morning, then come back and do his heavy hypertrophy work in the afternoon. Most of us would do both in the same session, and that is absolutely fine. But Someone like Tom, by giving himself time to rest in between sessions, is able to lift more weight, get more volume, and be more performant because his recovery is optimized. In the same line, on day 5 and 7, he opens the day with dynamic strength work where he needs to be very explosive, and then he'll come back later in the day to heighten his strength and he'll train the same exact pattern, but this time statically. So this might look like apply a push-up in the morning for the chest, but then a heavy bench press in the afternoon. And just from that, we see that we're dealing with someone who perfectly understands how recovery works. He always puts dynamic work before static work, and he always puts static work before hypertrophy work. That way, he can perform at his best when it's needed while keeping fatigue in check all the time. And for someone that big and that strong, this is super key. Because when you lift that much and you move that much poundage, you cannot just guesstimate it, your body would break down. And so the recovery aspect is in reality the most important aspect of his split by far. And to cite Josh Bryant, who is the person who wrote this split for Tom, it's not how far we can push this. It's how much do we need to hit these adaptations and what can we realistically recover from. And I think that whether you're training for strength or for size, this is the mindset that you must adopt. Don't make the mistake of thinking, how can I do as low as possible to grow as much as possible? That is exactly how the HIT cultists think. And usually what ends up happening is that they do way too little and they don't see the growth that they expect from it because their mentality is skewed one way. Likewise, don't think, how much can I do to grow? Because realistically, what is going to happen is that you'll end up doing way too much. And since we know now that you can go upwards of 52 sets and see better results, it's simply not the right mindset. Instead, you must think, how much do I need? This will set you up for success because now, instead of letting recovery dictate the training, you'll allow the training to dictate recovery. So the choices will be much more realistic and they'll also be much more aligned with your goals. It's always a bad idea to say, I want to do X amount of sets. That's not up for you to decide. You will do the amount of sets required to grow, not less and not more. But naturally, the amount of work that Tom is doing is still absolutely insane. I mean, he trains 10 times a week. The amount of tonnage that he moves in a week is more than we all lift in like 2 or 3 months. But that's the reality of someone who is that big. The amount of volume his body needs to keep growing is insane. And keep in mind that we're talking about a guy who attempted to reach 400 pounds at 10% body fat, which is a weight that many strongman competitors never reach. And these guys are 20-30% body fat. So to get at that level of mass while staying shredded requires an insanely disciplined diet. And this is what we're going to talk about next, namely his diet and lifting philosophy. So when it comes to bulking up, Tom's goal is not to get as big as possible, which is funny to say, the guy is 400 pounds. But unlike what you might think, he could actually get much heavier than this if he just ate sloppily and didn't care about his body composition. Someone 6'8" can easily get to 450 if he just eats as much as he can. But the problem with this approach is that he would lose a ton of mobility and more importantly, he would lose a ton of athleticism. So sure, he would gain static strength, but the rest of his stats would suffer. And since the guy is a tactical athlete, it's simply not what he wants. So now we're left with a real dilemma. The guy wants to gain muscle, but his daily caloric needs are out of this world, and he has to justify training 10 times a week because if he doesn't actually eat to meet these caloric expenditures, he will lose weight and he won't gain much muscle at all. Which leads to one of the most ridiculous bulking diets I've ever heard in my life that I'm going to share with you guys because it is just fun to see how much food an actual human being can consume on a given day. So Tom's typical day when he's bulking looks like this. Meal 1, he'll mix a banana, 20 grams of dates, 20 grams of honey, 100 milligrams of full cream milk, and black coffee. He'll blend all of this together and he'll drink it all down. On the side, it'll have 4 whole eggs. That's meal 1. For meal 2, he will take 800 grams of ground beef, 750 grams of white rice, 600 grams of sweet potatoes, 100 grams of lentils, 500 grams of broccolis, and 100 grams of carrots. He'll put all of that in a crock pot and he will eat all of it throughout the day. Do you realize how much food that is? Picture it to yourself. Picture a massive pot and understand that this massive pot is filled to the brim. Now visualize a human being eating that entire pot in a day. That would be enough food for a family of 3 to 4 for several days in a row. The guy consumes all of that by himself in a day. But that's only his daytime food, because when comes nighttime, Tom craves sweets. So what he does is, he'll take 300 milligrams of milk, 200 grams of blueberries, 200 grams of cereals, he'll blend it all up, and he'll drink it all down. And that makes up a grand total of 7,000 calories. 361 grams of proteins, 1,000 grams of carbs, and 120 grams of fats. For reference, the average adult lifter who's on the bulk might be eating around 3,000 calories in a day. This guy consumes more than twice that. So he not only looks and lives like a horse, but he actually also eats like one. Because if you look at the foods I detailed, that's super clean. He's not actually eating sloppy food or eating garbage from McDonald's. This is food that he makes that is mostly vegetables and clean carbs with clean sources of proteins. And for anyone who's attempted to bulk like this, it's hard. It requires discipline because soon enough, that food is going to taste like cardboard. So if you have to choke it down 5 times a day, you better really want it. But sadly, if you're a tall man watching this video or someone with a fast metabolism, you know the struggle. This is something I'm very glad I don't have to deal with because my metabolism is shit. So I can eat like an extra bowl of rice and I gain weight like this. I feel bad for people who have to force feed all the time because hating your food is not a fun situation to be in when you're in the middle of a bulk. But that's a reality for tall guys. Tall guys tend to have difficulties filling up their frame because their limbs are so long and they have a ton of real estate. So for them to get a very impressive physique tends to require to get much heavier than the average man. And I think this is why there's so much hatred against manlets. On one hand, lengthlets would like you to believe that they feel superior, but deep down, they're jealous of manlets because most guys who are like 5'7", they're going to start looking really good after a few years in the gym because their muscle is packed on a much smaller frame. Whereas you could be 6'2" and have actually decent numbers on your squats for your legs and even good measurements, and your legs will still look like toothpicks because they're way too fucking long. And as a response, a ton of very tall guys tend to like dirty bulking because that way you can pack on mass very, very fast. But the issue is that that mass tends to be fat, and fat doesn't look impressive or good. Whereas look at Tom. When you do it slowly with the help of some anabolics, of course, you end up with a physique that is out of this world. And I'm here to tell you that even if you're not on anabolics, you can get very good results as a tall man only if you're patient. If you slow bulk and you train, you'll find out that not only will you get much higher absolute strength compared to a shorter dude because you have much more mass overall, but you'll also look much more impressive. When you meet a guy who's 6'4" built, it hits differently than when you meet a guy who's 5'7" and who's muscular. No shame or disrespect to my short brothers out there, but it's important that we uplift tall lifters because times and times again, we see them give up because they think it's impossible to get big when you are above 6 feet. And this is what makes Tom even more of a freak because he's not just tall, he's like tall. 6'8" is insane. I don't know if you've ever met someone as tall and as big as Tom, but if you ever have, you know that it's reality shattering. It's a story I told on the channel in the past that I will tell again because I know many of you guys missed it. It was one of my earliest videos. But back when I used to live in France, there was a guy in my neighborhood who was 6'11", 7 feet, and who was like massive. He was a built black dude. And the first time I met him was when I was walking in the rain in my hood, and I had an umbrella on me. And I was already 6 feet at the time. So I was used to look people at high level at least. And as I was walking, I saw someone on my side, some movement. And so I turned my head. And when I turned my head, I could only see a torso. Meaning that the thing on my left was so tall that even his shoulders were out of sight. And I remember tilting the umbrella up to reveal the monster, and just bit by bit until I saw his face, and his face was like in the clouds. And it was like a reality shattering moment for me because for the first time in my life, I met someone who I thought, okay, this guy can literally pick me up and slam me on the ground, and there's nothing I could do to stop him. That is how big the guy actually was. But the funny thing with these guys is that, from experience, they tend to be super mild-mannered, and they also seem to not like the attention at all. And it's also the vibe I get from Tom, because have you ever heard of the guy before? I mean, he's not trying to get attention, even though he could. He's like strong enough to break world records. And yet, you never hear the guy brag. And even in his videos, unless he's in the gym, he's always covered up. He's never showing up his muscles. He always has this like big, it looks like a top. Okay, I'm sorry with the Bigfoot comparisons. It looks like he went into the forest, located a tarp or a tent forgotten by some campers, and he picked it up and arranged it to make a vest because it's the only thing that could fit him. But in a way, it's even counterproductive because I find that he looks even more threatening and impressive when he has that thing on. Because he looks like a version of Jason that would have picked up gardening as a hobby. But at the same time, he clearly is surrounded by animals all the time, so he must be a really sweet dude down there. So he's a mix between Jason and a Disney princess, which is not something I ever thought I would ever want to see in my life. But now that I've seen it, I want a movie about the guy. I'd actually watch this. But to get back to his training philosophy, Tom follows a school of thought known as physical fortification. And if you know him and you are a bit versed into the powerlifting scene, you know that he's being trained by Josh Bryant, who runs Jailhouse Strong, who is also highly respected by everyone in the industry because he coached people both for strength and for size, which is sort of Tom's goal, but not really. His goal is more of becoming a stronger, faster, and more endurant human being, which results in a training practice that is extremely diverse, as I've already presented. But there are a few aspects of that training that I want to focus on in particular because they are very interesting and they speak again to his philosophy. So the first one is the emphasis he puts on neck training. Tom trains neck all the time, but most importantly, he trains it with two modalities. The first one is for hypertrophy, so higher reps, less weight, and more range of motion. But he also does something I see very few athletes do, and that is to train it via isometric contraction. So what he'll do, for example, is he'll use a neck harness, he'll tie himself to a sled, he'll put rocks on the sled, and he'll drag the sled using his neck. And if you think about it, this is a much more functional way to train neck for an athlete. Because oftentimes, if you're a wrestler, a fighter, if you play rugby or football, you don't use your neck as something that's mobile. You fix your neck in a position and you push with your head. So when you train it, you also want to train it in that very same fashion because the carryover is much higher. But regardless of if you play sports or not, everyone should train neck, both for the aesthetic purposes. A thick neck makes you look better automatically as a man, but also as an insurance policy. I cannot tell you the amount of people who got into serious car accidents who survived solely because their neck was thick and developed. A thick neck might be the difference between life and death. And when you realize how little time it takes to see massive size and strength gains in terms of neck training, it is an absolute travesty that so many of you are still skipping neck. So get you a harness and start supersetting these neck movements today. And speaking about life lessons we can take from Tom, we also must look at the way he treats isolation movements. Because oftentimes with big guys who can move a shit ton of weight on the compounds, you'll notice that they have a sort of disdain for isolation movements for the simple reason that on isolations, you cannot move as much weight. And so in their head, automatically, it means that these movements are lesser. They're not as important, or worse, that these movements are fluff. So the fact that a 900-pound deadlifter like Tom Haviland puts the same intensity on his bicep training than he does for the rest of his body is saying a lot. Because it really shows that all of these other idiots are just copying out of training certain muscles using stupid excuses. Because just because you're strong doesn't mean that it's a good idea to literally ignore entire parts of your body unless somehow this aligns with your training. But as an hybrid athlete who wants to be overall strong and developed, Tom actually treats every single muscle group with the same seriousness, and it's super refreshing to see. And it also results in a very balanced physique. Who would have thought that if you actually train every muscle group equally, the entirety of the body develops equally? Because Tom is the textbook example of someone who was built to have a spider physique. This was written in the stars for him. And yet, look at his arms. They might be his best body part. Why? Because he trains biceps like a fucking savage. So despite his training method resembling what some would call power building, we see that the results are tremendous simply because he doesn't hyper-focus on the big three. And that doesn't mean that he doesn't lift a shit ton of weights on these lifts or that he doesn't train them. He does, but it's not everything. It's a small part of his training. He has all the means to express his strength, which is also a very interesting mindset shift we can take from Tom. If you are a strength enthusiast, that's great. The way you should regard these lifts is as a way to express that strength. Do not let yourself get pigeonholed into the same three patterns unless this is what you actually use to compete. But since Tom doesn't compete on these lifts, he also does a ton of strongman movements and a ton of hypertrophy work. However, he still follows the basic logic of low reps for strength and high reps for size. And while he does use a lot of schemes that are not the best for hypertrophy, like 6 sets of 1, I still believe that some low rep work can be very beneficial for bodybuilding. And I know it's ironic that I'd be the one defending low reps for bodybuilding, considering how much I shit on power building all the time. But I'm starting to see a lot of pure bodybuilders who are pushing the idea that any sets below 5 reps is automatically garbage for hypertrophy. And since I don't agree with that, I think that it's my job to make sure that the pendulum is not shifting all the way into the domain of everything below 15 reps is garbage, like I've heard some people say. So the reason why it might be smart for you to implement some sets of 3 or 5 to your training is because it's going to allow you to train at a very high absolute intensity, which also has a tendency to push performance on the lifts that you perform with high reps, granted that the two are connected. So for example, if you only do bench press with a 6 to 10 rep range, it might be a good idea to do a lower rep range on the side, because you might find it hard to progress in weight and reps at some point if you stick to that 1 rep range. So adding a day where you do, for example, a 3x3 with a pause or a close grip is a good way to spike your intensity, which in return will promote progression on the other rep range. And sure, these sets are very fatiguing and they're not giving you much volume. So for hypertrophy at first glance, they're not that great. But keep in mind that as long as you keep these below 5 rep sets to be at around only 5% of your total rep ranges for your entire program, you're fine. Because now you're not sacrificing on volume for hypertrophy, but you're still getting the benefit of high intensity sets. It's something that I do personally for dips and for pull-ups, where I'll do a 3 to 5 for 3 sets every single week. And I've found that this really makes it much easier to progress on my other presses and my other pulls. Just keep in mind that I'm not telling you to do a 3 rep max. Okay, you will never do an actual balls to the wall 3 rep max for only 1 set. That would be way too skewed towards strength. Instead, I said that a 3x3 is a good idea because if you look at a 3x3 in reality, the only set that is truly close to failure is the third set of 3. The first 2 are relatively easy compared to the last one. So you'll get to failure, but that failure will be reached through relative intensity because of the fatigue of the first 2 sets. Which is also why I think that a 5x5 is pushing it and I don't recommend it, because we want to do as little sets as possible with these very low reps. So 3 and even 2, a 2x5 or 2x3 might be even better indicated for hypertrophy. So now that we're done with his diet and training philosophy, let's move on to the physique critique. Before we start, let me preface by saying that Tom Haviland is twice my size, and that's not an exaggeration. He's literally twice my size. I'm 220, he's around 400 pounds. Yeah, he's 2 me's. Like, I don't know if you realize how ridiculous this is. The guy is an absolute golem. If I was next to him right now, I would look like his son. He would dwarf me into oblivion. And it's important that I remind you of this because there's this tendency on the internet to blow standards out of proportion, something that is especially bad with teenagers, because we're so exposed to insane physiques that some people now think that unless you're like 280 at 5% body fat, you're small. But understand that this is only true on the internet. In the real world, someone my size is big. I'm much bigger than the average male. And also goes with the gym. I remember reading a comment by someone who was taking a shit on Geoffrey Verity Schofield, saying that his physique wasn't even that impressive and that there was 5 of him in his gym. Like there were 5 dudes as big as GVS in his gym. To which I say, okay, give me location. I want to move where you live. In your gym, you have 5 people who are 220 lean naturally. I've literally never met anyone like this in any gym I've ever been to. Even the gym I go to now, that is famous for being hardcore, I'm one of the biggest guy here. The average gym goer, the average male that trains is 170, 180. Sometimes you meet guys who are like 190. But every time you meet a dude who's like 200 above, the guy is either fat or so tall that it's not even that impressive. And I think that this perspective shift and check is important because it's going to help you actually fix your fucking body dysmorphia. Like if you as a natural lifter get to 200 pounds and you're not a giant and you're relatively lean, you're big. You did it, dude. You look like you lift. That is until you meet someone like Tom and then you are being dwarfed because what else is there for you to do? The dude is a Nephilim, an actual Nephilim. I think that maybe all of these bones they found in like the Middle East that made everyone think, oh, they were giants. No, it's just Tom's ancestors. They went to Egypt for a vacation and they never came back. So now let's talk about the monster himself. Let's talk about Tom and his physique. So for biceps, I'm giving him an S because they are literally as big as my head, so I don't really have a choice. For triceps, an A, very good triceps for someone with such long arms, which is explained by the fact that he presses a ton in his program and he's been pressing for a long time. When you combine strongman with general hypertrophy training, you're going to have very good pressers. It's pretty much unavoidable. For the forearms, a B, because he has super long forearms, so a B is already a great grade. I think that there are some people in the arm wrestling sphere who are trying their hardest to convince him to pull because they want to see the freak on the table, and I want to see that as well. So maybe if they can convince him to start doing some arm wrestling training, he'll get an A or S for forearms, but right now they're a bit lagging. Then for shoulders, S, he has massive bulbous shoulders, which is explained by, yes, the anabolics, of course, but also strongman. Strongman training in general will give you rounded shoulders and will also blow up your traps because you're carrying stuff all the time. And unsurprisingly, Tom's traps are S tier as well, and so is his neck. Because when you lift literal cranes, when you do your neck curls, or when you find a random piece of metal in the junkyard and you tell yourself, you know what, this is something I could use to train neck. Yeah, you're going to have a neck that's thicker than most people's legs. It's pretty much part for the course. Then we have the upper back and lat, where he has an A for this body part, which is very impressive as well, but it's due to the general nature of his training. He does a ton of vertical pulls, which many strongmen cannot do, and it's not because they don't want to, it's because they can't, because they're limited by their body weight. But since the guy is pretty much all muscle, he can bang out pull-ups like he's some 150-pound calisthenic guy. Then you have the lower back and the core. I'm giving an S for both. He has a shredded six-pack. At 400 pounds, it shouldn't be possible, but for some reason it is. And the lower back, yeah, I guess when you can Zercher deadlift 700 pounds and you can easily pull 800 pounds for reps on the deadlift, you're going to have a big lower back. It's pretty much unavoidable. But sadly, his quads and hamstrings are not as developed. He only gets a B for them, which is the curse of any tall man, and Tom is super tall. Even with crazy squat and deadlift numbers, his legs are always going to be lagging behind more or less because there's way too much real estate for him to fill out. which also explains why, by the way, even someone his size would struggle in bodybuilding, because bodybuilding is not about who can look more like an ogre or who can scare horses and people alike. It's about who looks the best with the more complete physique, and short dudes have a massive advantage for that always. But the one thing that Tom doesn't have to blush about is his calves, because they're really developed. So I'm giving him an S for that as well, which I think is also explained by all of the carries. When you move heavy stuff all the time in that fashion, your calves are going to grow. And the crazy thing is that despite all of his grades being super high and his overall shape being out of this world, it still pales in comparison with his strength. So to end this video, I want to share 2 of Tom's feats of strength that made even someone like me, who doesn't give a fuck about strength, go, what the fuck is this and how is this possible? The first is a Zercher video where Tom picks up a barbell, deadlift style, then he tosses it up in the air and grabs it, Zercher style, in the crooks of his elbows, like the thing is made of plastic, like it's a toy, then he squats it and he re-racks it. And to understand how crazy that is, you need to have done a Zercher lift at least once in your life. Because if you don't, you might not know it, but the average male wouldn't be able to pick up 225 from the ground. Like, the bar would not budge. Even from waist level, that would be tough. Then you have to consider that at the end of the lift, Tom re-whacks the weight. It's like with a high pole. The heavier the weight is, the harder it is to get high. The more range of motion you lose. I know that for me, Zercher style, 225, I wouldn't be able to re-rack it because I couldn't actually get my arms to lift up that high. Tom did it with twice that weight on the bar. And we talk about like 1,000-pound deadlifts, a 700-pound bench. Sure, that's impressive. But this, I don't think I've ever seen another human being on earth doing this, for the simple reason that even someone very strong would tear both biceps doing that. Like, the bar would open your elbows up and you would snap up both your bicep tendons. That's a guarantee. And talking about biceps, the second video is Tom doing a negative on the preacher curl with 240 pounds. And we're not talking about a bullshit negative rush. No. He actually goes down slow with it. He's in control of that weight. Likewise, have anyone do that. Have me do that. Both my biceps would explode. And I have very strong developed biceps. This dude is outside of this world. There's this world, it's us, we live in this world on this planet, we're having fun, then there's Tom on another planet. And we're just begging, hoping that he doesn't decide one day to invade us for resources. I mean, the fact that this dude doesn't compete is a shame, because can you imagine how fun it would be to see him at the Arnold's? I mean, it's great that he doesn't require the approval or attention of others to be happy, and you know what? All the best to him for that, because that's a quality that many people lack, but shit, I think that we, the lifting community, are missing out on a ton of entertainment. And that's going to be the end of this video. So, if you have another lifter, another monster you want me to cover, let me know. I love this series and I want to continue it. If you have missed the previous installments of the series, you can find them in the description. And talking about the description, if you have liked this video and you would want to support this channel, you can do so on my Ko-fi page. It's the first link. You can pledge, you can donate. Anything is appreciated and allows me to keep putting a lot of work in this content. And I'm going to leave you with that. I hope you guys have a very Merry Christmas with your family. I will be seeing you very soon. Thank you for watching and have a good day.